The unsettling true scandal behind Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. The Picture of Dorian Gray was published in 1890. It was attacked immediately as immoral, corrupting, and perverse. One reviewer called it a tale spawned from the leprous literature of the French decadence. 5 years later, it was read aloud in a courtroom as evidence against its author. Oscar Wilde sat in the dock and was forced to defend his own fiction as proof that he was not a criminal. He lost, and the trial, and the book, and the life it mirrored is one of the most extraordinary stories in literary history. The real Dorian. Before we get to Lord Alfred Douglas, whom everyone mentions, there is another young man worth knowing about. John Gray was a poet, a civil servant, and a breathtakingly beautiful young man who moved on the edges of London's aesthetic circles in the late 1880s. Many scholars believe John Gray was the model for Dorian Gray. Gray was noted for his beauty and had a relationship with Wilde. In his celebrated biography of Wilde, Richard Ellman claimed, "To give the hero of his novel the name of Gray was a form of courtship." Wilde probably named his hero not to point to a model, but to flatter Gray by identifying him with Dorian. Indeed, Gray for a time signed his letters to Wilde as Dorian, and others in their circle called him such too. The novel is, among other things, a love letter, a portrait painted in prose. An older aesthete, Lord Henry Wotton, takes a beautiful young man under his wing, teaches him to worship beauty above all else, and watches as that worship corrodes everything it touches. Wilde knew exactly what he was doing. He was describing, in fictional terms, the particular danger of his own position. The older, brilliant man, the beautiful younger acolyte, the world that would destroy them both if it knew. He published it anyway. Bosie. In 1891, the same year the expanded edition of Dorian Gray was published, Wilde was introduced to Lord Alfred Douglas, known to his family and friends as Bosie. Douglas had already read The Picture of Dorian Gray multiple times, centering on a beautiful young man whose decadent lifestyle is influenced by an older male aesthete. The novel's plot in some ways mirrors the relationship that Douglas and Wilde soon formed. The symmetry is almost too neat. Wilde had written a novel about exactly this relationship, and then lived it. By 1893, Wilde was infatuated with Douglas, and they consorted together regularly in a tempestuous affair. If Wilde was relatively indiscreet, even flamboyant in how he acted, Douglas was reckless in public. Douglas soon initiated Wilde into the Victorian underground of male prostitution. Douglas's father, the Marquis of Queensberry, the man who had codified the modern rules of boxing and was known for his brutish directness, was furious. He confronted Wilde repeatedly. He left a calling card at Wilde's club, addressed to Oscar Wilde, posing sodomite. The misspelling did not blunt the intent. Against the advice of almost everyone who loved him, Wilde issued a civil writ against the Marquess for criminal libel. It was the most catastrophic legal decision in literary history. The trial. During the trial, Wilde was questioned closely on the homoerotic themes in The Picture of Dorian Gray. Queensberry's attorney announced that he had located several male prostitutes who were to testify they had had sex with Wilde. Wilde's own counsel advised him to drop the case. He did, but the damage was done. The evidence made him vulnerable to arrest for having violated Britain's Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1885, which criminalised sex acts between men, urged to flee to France, where homosexuality was legal, by his friends, Wilde refused, unable to believe that his world was at an end. He was arrested. He stood trial. He was convicted. He spent the first several months at Pentonville Prison, where he was put to work picking oakum, spending hours at twisting and teasing apart recycled ropes. He was later transferred to Reading Jail, where he remained until his release in 1897. Meanwhile, Douglas, the man whose recklessness had contributed substantially to the disaster, had deserted Wilde before his original conviction and had not returned to England, let alone visited his friend in prison, in over 2 years. The aftermath. Wilde was released in 1897. He left England and never returned. He lived in France and Italy in poverty, under the name Sebastian Melmoth, a reference to a Gothic novel about a man who sells his soul. He wrote a long, heartbreaking letter to Lord Alfred in prison, titled De Profundis, Latin for Out of the Depths. After his release, he did publish, under a pseudonym, The Ballad of Reading Gaol, a lengthy poem about a prisoner's feelings toward another prisoner about to be executed. He never published under his own name again. He died in a Paris hotel room in November 1900, aged 46, of cerebral meningitis, possibly exacerbated by the conditions of his imprisonment. His last reported words: "My wallpaper and I are fighting a duel to the death. One of us has to go." The picture of Dorian Gray ends with Dorian stabbing the portrait and the corruption transferred back to him. His body found, aged and withered, a knife through its heart. The portrait restored to its original beauty. Wilde had written the ending of his own life into a novel, 10 years before he lived it. The book that was used to convict him described, with agonizing precision, the bargain he had made. Beauty purchased at the cost of everything else, and the portrait eventually collecting its debt.